So good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's webinar. We're just going to allow a couple of minutes for everybody to join us and then we'll get going. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Our speaker this evening for this update on the project to rescue Fairburn Tower is Linda Lockett, Senior Regional Surveyor for the Landmark Trust, and she's the project manager for Fairburn Tower. Before I hand over to Linda, I've got 3 bits of housekeeping to mention about how this webinar works. The first is that you might have noticed that we're trialing using automatic subtitles. So you'll see the words that I'm saying coming up on the screen at the front. We know these are helpful for some people, but I know that they can also be really distracting if you don't find them useful. So if you don't find them useful, they're really easy to switch off. If you go to the bottom of your screen and you click where it says live transcript and click on the little arrow, there's an option there to hide the subtitles. So if you don't find them useful, I do recommend switching them off because they do struggle a little bit with technical terms and they sometimes are more amusing than useful unless you need them. The second bit of housekeeping is that I know that some of you, but not everybody, joined our previous webinar back in November with Linda and with Tom Addiman, who's the project archaeologist for Fairburn Tower. If you didn't see that webinar and you'd like a recording of it, please just let me know because I'd be happy to send you a link to that webinar, and that focused particularly on the history of Fairburn Tower and the really early days of the project on site, the first things that we did on site, in a bit more detail than Linda's going to be able to cover this evening. So if you would like a link to that recording, maybe just pop your name in the question and answer box, the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to send you a link. The third bit of housekeeping is that we would love you to ask questions this evening. So please use that question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Type in any questions that you have, and then at the end, I'll collect them together and we'll put them to Linda to answer. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Linda for an update on what's been happening on site at Fairburn Tower over the last few months. Thank you so much for being with us, Linda.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Today, I'm going, as Hattie's already said, I'm only going to give a quick reminder of the history of the tower and the early stages of work. Most of what you'll see today is an update on the progress with the works and the most recent photographs, which were taken during my site visit last Wednesday, which was actually a glorious day, as you can see from the photograph here. Right, just to recap on the history of Fairburn Tower, it was built by Murdo Mackenzie in about 1545, mid-16th century, and was 4 stories in height. You can see the olive green area in this rectified photography drawing, which has been coloured up by the archaeologists to show the different phases of work. At this stage, it had an entrance at the first floor, which is currently covered by the current stair tower, and a much lower roof line. It was extended in the early 17th century when an extra story was added in these bartizans, and most importantly, a stair tower. So previously, the stairs had kind of wound up from the first floor through the centre of the walls. And by the early 17th century, they'd built themselves a stair turret, which gave a grand entrance at ground floor and a spiral staircase going up there to each of the floors above. The basement had always been used as a kind of defensive area, and it had gun loops, one of which you can just see here running all the way around the bottom of it. So that was used for keeping marauders out. And obviously the risk became less in the 17th century because they were willing to put a door on the ground floor. The tower would have sat within what's called a barmkin, which is basically a farmyard wall, defensive farmyard wall, and would have contained things like sheds and barns and grain stores and other ancillary buildings which were associated with the tower. Now, most of those have gone except for the cottage outbuildings which remained inhabited after the tower was abandoned in the 18th century. This slide shows a picture of, or an etching of the tower as it was in the late 19th century from a book by McGibbon and Ross, who kind of sketched and documented many tower houses across Scotland. And you can already see that this is in a really poor condition. And next to it's a photograph of the tower in 1879, and it shows the thatched cottages occupied next door. Eventually, it was all abandoned, and this is how we found the building when we took over. It's a shell. The roof's gone, the floors have gone, and there are serious structural issues. As you can see from this photograph, a great crack running up the front there, and that's repeated where the stair tower joins the main tower there. So I think we arrived just in the nick of time, because it was really in a very serious state of repair. And there's another view of the tower in the snowy landscape, and some of the features internally, which show to just how fine tower it was inside. Externally, it might have been defensive, but internally, it was a fine structure indeed, and showed off all the kind of latest detailing, very sharp, crisp stone masonry and plaster work. So what are we proposing? Well, we're going to restore the tower to hopefully something approaching its kind of second phase of work. So we're not looking at reversing anything that's happened to it, but hopefully we'll get an essence of what it may have looked like during the early 17th century. We'll be putting the roof back, restoring the bartizans, replacing this little dormer window here, repairing all the cracks, putting shutterboard windows into the window openings and the new door, rendering and lime washing the whole building. In terms of what we're going to do inside, there is a single room on every floor. So we've got 5 floors. The basement we won't be touching. It's going to retain its gun loops and its kind of military feel, and we'll be leaving it as it is, so that you can get a sense of what it may have been like to be there in the 16th century. We'll be replacing the staircase, which had long since gone, in concrete, and I'll explain a bit more about that later on in the talk. And then the 4 inhabited floors will have a kitchen on the first floor, a sitting room on the second floor, a bedroom on the 3rd floor, and a second bedroom on the 4th floor, which will be in the kind of roof space, partly in the roof space. Right, so where we started with the work, we began scaffolding in early 2020. And very soon we realized that we needed to excavate some foundations for the scaffolding as it went up. So the archaeologists went on site and started during very wet weather to try and dig out the areas where the foundations were going, and very soon realized that there was something under the ground that we hadn't expected, and that is the original cobbled courtyard from the first phase of the tower construction. So here it is excavated, and we think that there are sort of the patterns of buildings in here, perhaps there. There are remains of walls around here, which kind of indicate perhaps a gatehouse. And it's a tremendous find and of great historical importance, and gives some context to the tower. However, this did delay us, and just as we were finishing this and starting to scaffold again, COVID lockdown started, and we ended up having to abandon site because construction work in Scotland was suspended by Nicola Sturgeon. So construction work suspended, we've got the tower part scaffolded, and in move a family of owls. So here's one of our little owlets. This is the one that refused to leave. Like all households, there's always a teenager who likes to hang around longer than it's welcome. Eventually in October, all the owlets had flown, and we were able to get back into the tower again and start work. So this is the completed scaffold, which was a great relief to get up. And we were able to start analysing the stonework and look at the work that we had to do. And now I shall take a step forward to a year on. So it's a year on from the completion of the scaffolding. We've got the walls consolidated and structurally sound again. The roof structure is complete and tiling's underway. The floor structure's been installed and work has been begun on the construction of the staircase. I'll start with a look at the consolidation of the stonework. I think we were quite horrified when we first went up there because it was an absolute lace work, and it was hard to believe that a lot of it was still standing. This is the west gable, and it contains a couple of flues from fireplaces down below. And you can see from this photograph that it's an absolute lace work of, so, and if you get the right angle, you could see daylight right through it. I think the contractor blanched when he first saw this because of the sheer amount of work it was going to take and the concerns he had over health and safety of his workforce working on this. So we ended up doing an awful lot more scaffolding than we expected to do, simply to support this stonework while it was being repaired. But we got there eventually, and thanks to the hard work of our contractors, LTM, we eventually got to the point where the building felt as though it was structurally sound again, and we were able to move forward. This is the gable having been complete. We had to dismantle all the stonework within this area and rebuild it because it was simply in too bad a condition to save. We then built up the flues within the wall and started constructing the chimney. Now this is the owner of the company, LTM, Stephen Laying, very skilled mason, with Andy Taylor, who's now our foreman on site, also an excellent mason, and the person who carved most of the stonework that was used to build the chimney. This is it only part built, so you can see that it's up to that level there, and then they've constructed right up to the top there. Now, internally, we did an awful lot of reconstruction as well. A lot of the masonry was missing and had to be rebuilt to restore the integrity of the structure. Now, we knew that the whole of the interior was going to be plastered, and therefore where we had new masonry that was to be covered up, we used brickwork. This was an awful lot cheaper than using stonework, but it was also a philosophical decision in that everything we were doing would be easily recognizable as new work to anybody coming after us, and couldn't easily be mistaken for anything else but a 21st century intervention. And you can see by the sheer volume of brickwork used here just how poor the structure was and how much rebuilding was necessary on the inside. So here's our architect, Julie Barclay, who works for Simpson and Brown, looking at the stonework on the other chimney. So this is a rather interesting bit of stone that has been reused from somewhere else on this chimney when it was constructed in the 17th century. We've left it there and then continued to build the chimney on above there. Back down to ground level, and this slide shows Andy Taylor dressing the stone for the window on site. A lot of the stone was sort of roughly measured and roughly cut and then finally finished on site by the masons on site, working through winter, I have to say, in the cold. They did a fantastic job with that, and were able to measure and take the stone up and adjust it as they needed to. So here's one of the completed window surrounds. We've kept as much stone as we can here, but this one we've had to put quite a bit of new stone in as well. We're particularly keen to make sure that we get a tight fit in the windows. As you can imagine, the winds blowing across the Highlands are quite fierce, particularly on such an exposed tower. And if they don't fit well, they'll be drafty and rattling. So the new stonework in certain instances is absolutely essential for this. This shows work on one of the bartizans, one of our other masons, Gail, working on the external face of the bartizan and dressing it in so that we get a smooth curve around the outside. This was quite a hard thing to set out and get the exact curve of the stone correct before it was moved up to the bartizans. Therefore, a certain amount of dressing has had to happen once we've got on site. The front door was in a very sorry state. Most of the stonework had failed and was crumbling away. It's also found that we didn't have a huge door height. It was just over 5 foot in height, which is small even by landmark standards. So we ended up increasing the height of the door by an extra few inches. So you'll still have to duck when you go through the door, but hopefully a few people will be able to get through without having to worry about the headroom. Right, onto the roof construction. As soon as we finished the stonework and got the wall heads all sorted out, we were then able to start reconstructing the roof. This wasn't as easy as it may seem. It may look like simple jack rafters leaning against a ridge, but the setting out was really quite difficult because the walls weren't straight, and each timber had to be a different length and measured and cut on site and hoisted up and put in place. Our foreman at the time managed to source some extra long timbers for this, so we didn't have to joint them, which was quite a feat due to the shortage of timber and the difficulty of getting materials on site. You can see the little bartizan roof starting to take shape here with its pointy top, and there's another one around the other side which you can't see here. We're looking here over the stair turret, so the roof hasn't been installed on the stair turret there, through into main body of the tower. So here's a view of the tower from the car park, which does show that we've started to put the roof on, and this is where, from a distance, that it started to make the difference when they started taking the scaffold down, and you started seeing the chimneys and the roof structure taking shape. And here's the bartizan again. So following the installation of the timber rafters, we then put the sarking board on, something that is very much a Scottish detail and not something that happens very often in England. The sarking board helps keep the roof structure stable, particularly when you have an exposed situation with high winds. It helps to stop wind getting up behind the tiles and lifting them off the roof, which apparently is quite a common occurrence in highland areas. This is the sarking board complete, and you start to see the real form of the roof taking shape with the bartizan roof there, and the steeply pitched main roof of the tower. And here they've added the roofing felt to the structure in readiness for tiling, and the bartizans are to have little finials on top, and we were really struggling to work out what size these should be. So this is something the masons did for us. They got a blue hand towel roll, put it on top of the bartizan, and then put on top of that various size footballs to see which one fitted the bill. This is the one we've gone for, so they're now carving a finial the same size as a football. We're now on to the tiling of the roof. This is how it was when I was on site last week. They've got the roof partially tiled, and they've also started tiling the base of the bartizans as well. The tiles are Scottish slate, and they're from Ballachulish. The quarry no longer exists, so we've had to source second-hand slates here. They're quite small slates and of uneven thickness, so very difficult to lay, and our tilers have made a fantastic job of this. So I'm looking forward to going next time, and hopefully the tiling will be complete. Now onto the staircase. This is one of the biggest issues we've had on site. It's a very complicated staircase to install. We've got quite a narrow stairwell, very uneven in size. So it goes from big at the bottom to small at the top, but in between it sort of wobbles about a bit and doesn't go up in a straight line either. All the original stone steps were stolen or taken out to use elsewhere, and that's had a real profound effect on the structure of the whole tower. That big crack that you saw at the front of the tower in the first photograph, that is caused by the staircase and that whole structural framework being taken out, and also it was coming away from the main tower because there was now nothing holding it together. The tower had been built, or the stair turret had been built flat against the tower, and the whole thing had started to move outwards. We know that it's a big issue because when we put the doorway in, even though we'd repaired all the cracks, it continued to move because we hadn't that structural framework to hold the whole thing together. So our staircase had to be structural, and this couldn't be achieved by putting a new stone staircase in. Our structural engineer, Steve Wood, came up with a proposal for a concrete stair, which is tied into the existing tower and the stair tower at all its corners. And this provides the structural stability for it. But we really struggled to find somebody who could do the work. But at last we've started. We now have 4 treads in, and this is Julie walking down those 4 treads, and on the right hand side you can see work progressing up the tower as we complete the formwork for the first flight. It's actually beautifully sculptural, and when it's finished it will have this kind of fan shape to the underside of the staircase created by the concrete shuttering. This is Rob Matterson. He's the concrete installer, and he's possibly the only person capable of doing this in the whole of Scotland. It took a long time to find him, but he's taking great pride in his work and doing a fantastic job of it. He's finding it very challenging, but I think he's loving every minute of it. On the left-hand side, you'll see the 4 steps that they've finished, and they've started finishing the surface on the top. So we've got this sort of slightly roughened surface, and they had these tools specially made to create a rounded nosing on the steps, and they'll be dressing down the front of the steps as well to get rid of the shutterboard marks and the bubbles in the face of the concrete. So we should have a nicely finished step. We've also coloured the concrete slightly so that it's not light grey, but much more of a kind of buff reddish sandstone colour, which should fit nicely with the stonework in the tower. Here's Julie again, looking at the external render this time. We've had a first coat of render applied, so this is kind of dubbing out a levelling course, which they actually applied with a spray gun. It's a lime mortar using hot lime mix, and this has been applied to all faces, but not to the dressed stone. We've still got a top coat to go on this, and that's the kind of hull coat which will be thrown on to the surface to give that rough cast feel to the surface. The hull will then be lime washed, and we'll lime wash right into the window reveals, and we're not quite sure what colour yet, but traditionally the colour of the sandstone used for the window dressings was replicated in the lime wash. So from a distance, it looked like your building was built entirely of ashlar stone and not whinstone, as the majority of this is built. We do know it won't be white, but it could be any of the colours of those stones you see on that picture on the slide. We'll look at the internal plaster. We had quite a lot of remains of internal plaster, more than we thought we would have, considering the building has been exposed for such a long time. On the right here, it's not very clear, but there's graffiti on this bit of plaster. And here you can see a plaster with the small remnants of lime wash or distemper in the cracks. And this photograph really highlights how fine the detailing of the plaster work was on the inside when the building was built. It's a very smooth fine finish with very sharp edges to the plasterwork. Now, we wanted to keep as much of the existing plasterwork as possible, and we did our best to do that. So in this photograph, you see that we're dubbing out here using a lime plaster, similar mix to that used on the outside, using a hot lime mix again, with a finer sun this time. And then the photograph on the left is the main coat of plaster, which we've married up to the line of the existing plasterwork there. And where we've got a sharp arras left on the stonework, we've followed that with the lime plaster and windowsill here. But in other areas, we've lost the definition. So we've just kind of eased the plasterwork round. So you can see where the building's aged. So this is the second floor, which will be the sitting room. And this is Craig here, just preparing the plaster ready for its final coat. So this has now had its second coat, and he's brushing it down just to kind of stipple the surface, bring some undulation and a key for that final coat of plaster. Now we're using a very fine lime top coat, which will be about 2 millimeters thick, so very, very thin indeed, which will give that smooth, fine surface to the plasterwork, which was typical of the plasterwork that was installed during the first build. You can see how carefully detailed this was originally with its arched window heads. Although this is the main sitting room, the fireplace is very small and would always have been this size. And this is the flue pipe, stainless steel flue liner, which will be joined to the stove once it's ready for installation. This doesn't have its floors in yet, but they were due to be installed on Friday, so hopefully we now have a full complement of floors. Now, since floors have gone in, we're starting to see the rooms taking shape and really sort of getting a feel for the spaces that we've got within the tower. This is the top floor bedroom, up in partly in the roof space. So these are the combs. This is the entrance from the stairwell, and this is an entrance into one of the bartizans. The fireplace straight in front, some of you may remember from the earlier slideshow, is the fireplace with the very precarious lintel, which I've just put a picture in here, so you can see that this lintel wasn't actually attached to anything on the side there. So that's all been repaired and rebuilt, and that fireplace restored to its original form. Still on the top floor here, we're going to be plastering the inside of the underside of the ceiling and down into the combs, and this is going to be done with a fibre board with a lime plaster skim over the top. We've got some very interesting angles to deal with here, and this is our carpenter Jim, who's cut some shapes for us to work out how we join one side of the arch into the bartizan to the other. So this is the shape we're going for, and that will be eased into an archway over the door. This is our little dormer window, and we're starting to build up the shape of the ceiling above that there. So into one of the bartizans, we've got the conical roof, which we'll line out with lime plaster. The walls will be dressed back and lime washed, and the windows will be infilled with a diamond leaded glass. We're going to keep the floor as it is. This is the original stone paving, and we think that's a nice touch to leave that in situ. On down a floor, we're now in the third floor, which was the original top floor and probably the highest status room in the building. It's got the largest fireplace. As you can see here, we've just had a new lintel put in. This took some doing. It's absolutely massive. It took seven men on site to just lever it onto a trolley to be lifted up by hoist to this floor. So quite a feat to get that in position. This is the original relieving arch we had rebuilt, which this will all be plastered in. And over to this picture, and you'll see one of the windows with window seats. So the window seat remains on this side, and we're going to add one in here as well. These castles would have been very dark, and the best places for reading or doing needlework or close work of any sort was to actually sit in the window reveals. We've just finalized the design of the windows, so the manufacture of those is starting in the next week or two. We're going to put shutterboard windows in, which are the traditional style of windows in Scottish tower houses. They'll have an oak shutters on the bottom third, and then the top 2/3 will be leaded glass. We're going to add an extra layer of insulation to that. Shutterboards are traditionally very drafty. They're not easy to seal. So we're putting double glazed secondary glazing in there. And then there'll be shutters beyond that to give privacy and stop the light getting in. Now down onto the second floor, which is has the highest ceilings of all the room, and was the main reception room in the original building. You can see now clearly these lovely arches. This was the brickwork, which has now been plastered over, and much easier to see the form of the building. Craig's just finishing off the plastering around the ombre cupboard there, and we're getting an oak door to put on that, so we'll restore it to its original form. Down to the first floor, and this is where the kitchen will be. We've got the kitchen will sit along this wall here. And there'll be a little larder store in this cupboard and a little window seat underneath this window here. On the left-hand side is the kitchen fireplace. We're still waiting for the lintel to arrive for this, but that will be installed as soon as we can install it. And the lot will be plaster will be finished on this floor. This floor is the only one that won't be timber. It'll have a stone floor. We're not quite sure what type yet, but we're getting samples of that. What would the tower, such as Fairburn, have looked like on the inside when it was originally built? I think we've got an idea nowadays that everyone back in the medieval period lived in fairly stark surroundings with exposed stonework everywhere and probably quite dark and gloomy. But that wasn't really the case. We don't have any evidence apart from the odd fleck of paint and the plasterwork at Fairburn as to what it was like inside, but we do know that there are other places which can lead by example. So This slide is of Hunting Tower near Perth, and it resembles quite closely the tower we've got at Fairburn. It was built at a similar period, the mid-16th century, and like Fairburn, it's got a room on each floor. It's one floor shorter. It doesn't have that defensive basement that Fairburn has, but it does have kitchen on the ground floor, a kind of reception room on the first floor, and then a private chamber on the top floor. And we think this may well have been how it was at Fairburn, with a fairly rough kitchen with some kind of screen that took you to the staircase without having to see what was going on in there. So your guests could come up to the reception room and be greeted with jolly decoration. And in this period, it was fashionable to paint the ceilings of buildings such as this, and provide brightly coloured wall hangings, which had not only the effect of cheering up the interiors, but was also very important to cut out drafts. So at Hunting Tower, they have an original painted decorative scheme from the 16th century and on one of the ceilings. So this is a representation of it. It was likely that the ceiling at Fairburn would have been painted and the walls hung with tapestries as in other properties or similar towers. We're still considering our internal finishes and haven't ruled out painting the ceilings, as we did at Castle of Park. For any of you who've been there, I haven't got a very good photograph of this, but you can see that this has been painted in much more of a 17th century style, which matches the kind of windows and interiors that Castle of Park would have had at the time. So this is the ceiling we've got, and we think it would look rather nice with some painted decoration on it. And I think just watch this space to see what happens next. And that's the end of my slideshow for today. I'll just leave you with this one, which is a picture, a panorama that I took a few weeks ago from the top of the scaffolding, just showing how beautiful the scenery is round about Fairburn Tower and what stunning views you're going to be able to get from the top of the tower once the work's complete. Though I can't guarantee you the blue sky. I think that's a rarity. But yes, I think it's beautiful, not just in bright sunny days, but also in those slightly darker days. And hopefully it'll be a lovely place to stay, nice and cozy. So I'll now hand back to Hattie with some questions.
Thank you so much, Linda. Well, you
us.
clearly had an absolutely stunningly beautiful sunny day on site last week when you were there, because those photographs are wonderful, aren't they?
Yes, I've been really lucky with the weather. I don't know how long it's going to last before I actually get a wet day on site, but I'm sure it'll come one day.
That's a wonderful overview of what's been happening. We could really do with some questions. If anybody would like to ask Linda any questions about the tower, about the work that's been going on site, please do type them in using the Q&A box at the bottom if there's anything that you'd like to ask. I mean, presumably the weather isn't going to hold for many more weeks, is it now? As autumn kicks in.
It was it was beautiful blue sky, but it was a biting northerly wind there last Wednesday. So yes, autumn is definitely coming to the Highlands with a vengeance, and I think in the next few weeks it's going to start getting difficult, which is always a problem for the contractors, because they don't like doing lime work during the colder colder weather, particularly up here where you get some really hard frosts and heavy snowfall.
I was going to ask, if it's a bad winter, is there any work coming up that isn't, would be delayed?
Well, luckily,
really
most
snowy.
of the work is now internally, but I mean, we had a very bad winter last year, and I think we only lost about 3 days to the weather. The contractors were absolutely brilliant and just worked through. They must have been frozen.
They're local, aren't they? They're quite used to it.
I'm not sure.
No. Okay, we've got some questions coming in for you, Linda, if you're ready for some of these. One question is about the courtyard, the cobbled courtyard in front of the building. How will the courtyard be presented when the landmark opens?
We're still working on that one. We had to cover the cobbles up again to do the scaffolding, so it was protected during the building work. So as soon as we've finished the work to the tower, or the outside of the tower, the scaffold will come down and we'll be able to reveal the cobbles again and work out how we can repair them and make sure that they can be on view. We've got a similar courtyard at Saddle Castle for anybody who's been there, and we've got that on view. So we're going to do a similar thing here. It's too good to cover up again, so we'll be keeping that.
Linda, I think I can see you on the video, but I think some people might not be able to actually see you on the video talking.
Right. So I wonder stop sharing my screen.
If you could stop sharing your screen with the presentation and make sure that your video's on, and then we might actually be able to see you answering the questions.
Right. That should be me.
That should be better now. Okay,
is that okay? Sorry, I'm here twice. My video's on a different screen to my audio. So.
Let's give that a go. We've got a couple of questions about the concrete stairs. In that, how do the concrete steps interact with the lime mortar and the walls? And did the professional team consider using stone for the stair tower instead of concrete? And why did we choose that? What was the reason for the eventual choice of concrete rather than stone?
The masons really wanted to use stone, as they would, but we had to put the concrete in for structural reasons. There is a mesh of reinforcement through the staircase, which has also been embedded in the walls. So the staircase is actually holding the tower stair, the stair turret up and attaching it to the building. And we know that it's been moving even after we've done the consolidation externally and had the scaffold supporting the outside. We've still been having movement in those walls, so it's absolutely essential that we have this reinforcement. Now, the reaction with the lime, the lime won't actually be touching the staircase. The concrete is quite separate to it, really. We're using lime on the outside, so it shouldn't affect the breathability of the tower and all the lime products we're using there. We couldn't use a limecrete for this; it just wasn't strong enough, and we've followed the advice of our conservation engineer, Steve Woods, who's one of the best around, and built it in concrete. And I think it's going to be fairly spectacular when it's finished. It's quite exciting seeing that come together.
We've got a question here about the vertical crack in the stair tower, that dramatic crack. How did we repair the vertical crack? Was it just the stone interlacing failing, or a more serious lean over?
It was the crack was caused by failure of the stonework in the doorway. So the doorway stonework had failed, the lintel had failed, and the stonework above was moving because of that. It was exacerbated by the fact that the staircase wasn't inside it and wasn't there to hold the whole thing together. How did we repair it? it was a lot of repair by building. So we kind of, where we had new stone and mortar and things going into it, made sure they were overlapped. But we also had steel reinforcement in there. So there are cut into the joints are steel bars, which tie one side of the crack to the other.
Yeah, we've got a question here about the heating. How will we manage the plumbing and heating issues? And importantly, is there any background heat? So someone coming to stay will not be coming to an icebox and have to wait for the fires to be lit.
No, we have background heat. We have quite a lot of heat here. All the services have been quite complicated, taking them up through the building so that they're not on view, but we're taking them through the thickness of the wall. The heating will be electric heating, and there's quite a lot of it. And what we've done in this building is we've insulated and draft proof much better than we would normally in a landmark. So this is done under the Scottish building regulations, which require us to have a certain level of thermal efficiency. So on the windows, the double secondary glazing, so you'll be completely draft proof the windows. We've got kind of really quite tight fitting doors. They're going to have to be sort of 1 hour fire doors, and those will be sealed quite tightly, so you won't get the usual drafts through the doors either. We've got insulation where we can in the roof and in the floors, so between each floor there's enough insulation to stop all the heat rising to the top of the building.
We've got a question here about the fabric of the tower. Is the tower fabric going to need long to dry out after the work that's been carried out? And if so, how will this be done?
Well, it's gradually drying out as we go on. The roof going on is a major start to that, and the fact that there's no windows in it at the moment and a gale blowing through it most days means that we've got really good air circulation, which is the best way to dry out a building. And of course, with the thickness of the walls, it's going to continue to dry out as even after we've occupied it. Now, what we have done is we've built it almost completely of lime products. So we've got natural stone with lime mortar, bedding mixes, we've got lime render on the outside, lime plaster on the inside, and those will be coated up with lime wash on both faces. So it's really breathable. So it will continue to dry out, and you may see damp on the internal faces of the wall, but hopefully that won't cause any real permanent damage to the building because we've used such breathable fabrics, breathable materials.
I wonder if you can tell us something about the bathrooms. We've got a question here. Will the bathrooms be Victorian rather than modern, but warm? Question mark. Tell us. What's the approach to the bathrooms?
Bathrooms
Not medieval.
Will be lovely and warm. They'll be little. I didn't do a slide of this. I should, but we've in the 2 bedrooms. Each bedroom has its own little pod against the wall, which will look like a large piece of furniture with a door into it. So it'll be internal, it'll be nice and draft proof and have its own heating. We haven't confirmed the bathroom fittings yet, but we're looking at those and looking at something which isn't too modern at the moment. But yes, watch this space.
To be decided. Can we return to the staircase, Linda? There's just one more question about the external staircase. Before the external staircase was added, I believe there were staircases partly within the walls. Have any of these been retained?
Right. From the first floor to the second floor, there was a straight flight of staircase which went right at the middle of the wall. This unfortunately was lost when they did the 17th century alterations. So we have the doorway which led into it, and you'll be able to see that in the sitting room. Part of it anyway, part of it's been blocked up. From the second to the third floor, there was a spiral staircase. I think I've got this wrong. The spiral staircase was from the first to the second, and the straight flight was from the second to the third. Sorry about that, but can you still hear me all right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. The spiral staircase, that the space for the spiral staircase exists, and the guests will be able to go in there and look up at it. And some of the treads do remain at high level, but not many. So that will be a storeroom, but guests will be able to see right up the two flights.
And finally, can you remind us of your estimated project opening date of opening to landmarkers?
Right, yes.
When
I
is this
didn't
going to
tell
be a
you.
landmark?
I didn't tell you how long it was going to take to finish. Right, we've got approximately 5 to 6 months worth of work to do to complete this. So we're looking at completing early spring next year. We're not going to commit to a date yet because we don't know what the winter's going to be like, or the supply of materials is also a potential issue. But once it's complete, we'll then have all our opening events, and hopefully you'll be able to book and stay in middle of the year at some point, mid to late summer.
Sometime next summer, early autumn.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the end of our questions this evening, Linda. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for a really fascinating update on what's been happening at Fairburn. That gorgeous weather and those lovely views. So it's great to see how fast everything's coming together. I think we might have one more question. Have we got one more question? Oh no, just great talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Linda, for giving us an update. And hopefully we'll see everybody again soon for another webinar update as the work progresses.
Definitely.
So thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
And bye. Bye.